Useless Monster by Mute Crows. Chapter 33, or 32. Izuku was still asleep as Izawa walked into the blindingly bright lobby of the hospital. He approached the front desk calmly and waited as the attendant finished the call she was taking.
Eraserhead. I called a bit ago about a room for my student,
he said as soon as she hung up and focused on him. She nodded and pulled out some paperwork and set it on the counter.
I will need you to fill this out and return it to me. I will page the nurses now. Is there anything pressing you are aware of?
No, he's mostly just tired, but he has burns and also multiple lacerations. Just want to make sure none of them need stitches.
He let go of one of Izuku's legs to grab the clipboard.
All right, take a seat. Wherever. As usual, this lobby is secured from the public, so you are free to discuss whatever is necessary with the medical staff.
She smiled, and it softened as he turned and she saw the sleeping teen he was carrying.
Legs.
Aizawa dropped the clipboard on a chair and nudged Izuku awake. He murmured something as he pressed his face into Aizawa's shoulder more.
Come on, kid, I can't sit with you strapped to my back, and I don't want to just drop you.
Izuku let out a drawn-out but quiet grumble as he stretched his one leg down. Aizawa unfurled his capture gear and lowered Izuku to be standing groggily. He picked up the paperwork and sat in its place. Izuku stood blearily for a moment before sitting next to him, hands immediately finding the loose end of the gear Aizawa had intentionally left down. He only gets some of the work done before he hears a sputtering from elsewhere in the lobby.
Hey, what's Squirrely doing with you? I told him to stay on the train.
Gran Torino, then.
You brought him to a high-risk active zone before he was licensed?
Aizawa raised a brow, not looking over, when he saw Izuku's hands grip the material in his fingers slightly.
Or would that train happen to be the same one that was damaged by the Nomu attack? Which would have me asking why you left your charge in a train of civilians again before he was licensed.
Gran Torino seemed a little surprised by that. Before he said anything further, though, Manuel made his appearance. Eraserhead! What are you here for? Manuel was openly curious, but when he saw Izuku, that morphed to surprise. It's you!
I think I am already done with the amount of questions I'm developing.
Izuku waved sheepishly. I guess you never found Tanya, then. I asked him after he got settled in if he got any messages from you, but I think he's just shaken up after tonight. It's all right. He knows I was looking for him, at least, Aizawa said.
So Ida is here? I assume that means Todoroki is here as well.
Aizawa watched as the door opened and two nurses stepped out.
Midoriya can go in their room then. It will make the billing easier for UA in the long run.
Manuel, Gran Torino, the chief is here to talk with you now. An officer spoke from a room adjacent to the lobby. Aizawa watched them leave to have their apparent meeting. Izuku pulled on the gear as the nurses approached in their absence. He had it in a death grip, and Aizawa held in a sigh.
Hey!
The nurse with the folder in hand closed their mouth as he spoke first.
Getting me placed to the same room as Ida Tenya and Todoroki Shoto. The three of them are my students at UA, and I would like to have them in the same room, if possible.
The nurses hesitated.
I'm assuming they're in the medical suite if the police chief is here.
He continued. Yes, sir.
I can fill out whatever forms need to be done. I just would prefer my students in the same room, if possible.
They glanced at their co-worker briefly before nodding.
We will see if the room transfer can happen.
Izuku was still holding onto his gear even as he stood up.
You can take it with you if you'd like, Midoriya.
Aizawa offered gently. The material was dropped. I'm okay. Not being open about being afraid in front of strangers yet. Okay.
I will be up shortly. I have to finish this first.
He lifted the clipboard he had in hand slightly. Izuku took a steadying breath. Okay, Sensei. Izuku glanced back once before the doors shut to see Aizawa still standing there and watching him. He wished he had something to do with his hands. If it hadn't been for the fact that he was possibly going to the room that Ida and Todoroki were in, he may have taken the scarf. He needed something for his hands, that's all. Something to prove they weren't sliced into ribbons from talons breaking through them. The nervous energy that usually would have followed him through the halls was heavily dulled by his exhaustion. His skin had scabbed over repeatedly, only to tear open as his costume pulled the wounds open again. He probably should see if there was any way to keep the blood out of his boots. The wicking material had just caused the blood to work its way into his socks. It felt disgusting. One of the nurse's pagers lit up, and once checked, the directions seemed to suddenly change. They had asked him something, at least he thought they did, but he hadn't been paying attention. They didn't apparently find it pressing, though, as they hadn't asked again. It wasn't until they slid open a door that they spoke again.
We will need to get you out of your gear to properly assess your injuries, Midoriya-kun.
The taller of the two spoke, and Izuku nodded in response. He didn't look at Todoroki and Ida, who he was well aware were in the room, as he unhooked his belt. The nurses were setting out a change of clothing for him, as well as things he would use to clean up. Unzipping his jumpsuit to let it hang around his waist, he felt fuzzy and drained. He could practically feel the heat of the burning questions his classmates had. Friends. They're friends. He felt sick. A third nurse came in, and he was being toweled clean, not reacting to the acidic pain of his burn being swiped over by the towels. They couldn't see it under the blood they were wiping off, and he knew that. It was fine. It kept him awake. He searched around until he felt the burning of dry eyes and brushed against the pain briefly. It was reassuring that Aizawa had in fact stayed. He had no reason to lie, but
nothing looks to need any kind of stitches or staples so far. We will need you to take off your boots too, though, Midoriya-kun. We have a change of clothes for you to change into.
The newest of the nurses said as more towels were dropped into a one-way bin for biohazard reasons. He followed their instructions. He also went ahead and stripped to his briefs. There was no point in beating around the bush, and honestly, he wanted to just get the change of clothes on already. Hospital lighting was making his scars look stark to his own eyes. He didn't want to think about how it looked to everyone else. Izuku knew it wasn't normal to feel like he was beside himself as his body functioned. A lot happened tonight, and he didn't think he was really grasping it all. He almost got his throat ripped out, and was saved by a villain who literally made his name killing heroes. He had bitten and mangled the person. Sure, it was just the arm, but he could still taste the iron in his mouth. He was standing in front of the mirror in the small bathroom he had been ushered into, clothing in hand. He changed with numb hands and distantly racing pulse, taking the time to clean up what the nurses hadn't and use the restroom while in there. When he stepped back out in the patient uniform, he felt like he was dragged further from himself. He knew he usually would be panicking, but it was so far away. He was tired and afraid, and tired of being afraid. He flinched a bit when a blood pressure cuff was wrapped around his arm, and the nurses took note immediately. They started talking him through every single procedural thing they were doing. It was kind. They finished and told him that he could see a doctor if he would like, but he would be fine without. He ran his fingers over the skin he had felt closing halfway through the time he had spent sitting in the alley with Aizawa. The holes were still under the skin on his throat. The nurses had no way to know it was there. He would be fine. He was left in his medical cot. The silence was beyond brief. The moment the door had been slid shut, leaving the three of them alone, it took 4 heartbeats for the others to break. Izuku counted. He just wanted to sleep again, though.
What the hell was that?
Ida had the actual metal to sound personally upset about tonight. Well, last night, Izuku could see the sky brightening outside with the sunrise.
The part where you chased down a serial killer on your own, or...
He didn't want to change his bed to the reclined position, not if he didn't have to. It was nice to lay down.
Midoriya!
It was falling back to a more distressed tone than angry one. He could handle that better.
Can I explain later? These nights are always more draining than typical ones.
He let his hands rest on his chest as he stared at the ceiling.
Will you actually explain, or are you going to dodge it?
Izuku sat up at that, the material of his shirt rubbing against his burn in an annoying way.
Are you really going to try and play that card with me right now, mister? I just want to scout Hosu for my future agency, sir?
He leveled a glare at Ida. The red glare he was receiving back was short-lived. Ida looked away first and finally looked at least a little ashamed. The tug of adhesive around his bandages was pulling him way too harshly back into his skin. He hated how everything felt. It all felt bad. Did Sensei bring you here? He said he knew where you were. Todoroki finally spoke. Izuku sighed. The cot hummed softly as he pressed the button that lifted it to a reclined position.
Yes, and yes, he did. We have a process worked out for this kind of thing. He doesn't add how it was only a few days ago that it had been established.
Why does Aizawa-sensei have...
The door opened and Ida stopped his words immediately.
Oi, you lot are still awake?
Gran Torino sounded like he was complaining, but his face said he expected nothing less. Izuku glanced at the window to see it was now properly morning.
Good. You have a visitor. He stepped aside and continued, This is the police chief.
The three all turned their attention to the dog-headed man who fixed his tie, probably compulsively, as he stood between Manuel and Gran Torino. Izuku watched the way that the hound didn't look at him directly. It was like with Sansa. He watched how the strip of fur along the apparent police chief's Kenji Sugarame, as he introduced himself, spine rose and stayed on edge. The officer did his best to play it off, though, even as Gran side-eyed him and launched into a speech. It was all appallingly typical. Izuku being present for it meant he danced around the hero killer being mentioned directly, and the others did nothing to correct him. Todoroki was visibly getting more and more angry at the treatment they were getting, a firm scolding for using their quirks to survive, as well as an underhanded praising of the standing system. He watched as Todoroki seethed, and Ida was not far from doing the same. Izuku felt his own frustrations rise. This was the same system anyone who benefited continued to praise, something that, to be fair, Stain had been right about. Those who benefit do not care to see those who were hurt by the system, not unless it would cause them to get a bigger name, which in reality was just further benefits. He glared at the police chief, feeling his agitation broil. The fur along the top of the chief's head started to stand on end. There was minimal satisfaction in how he tried to subtly brush it back down with a gloved hand. Even as Todoroki finally broke his bristling silence to start arguing their position, a useless endeavor to be sure, Manuel was quick to shut him down. The praise that followed was meaningless, a shallow attempt to brush over the issues and repaint the self in a friendly light. The thing that finally got Izuku to look away from the chief was something that he fought hard to not recoil in shame from. The other two grew incredibly tense as well.
How are you feeling, Todoroki-kun? I am told you narrowly escaped two Nomu that attacked at once.
Fine. Todoroki's response was beyond tense.
That's good to hear. I do wish you three a fast recovery after the night you've had, and that you proceed with the agreed-upon notion of letting sleeping dogs lie.
The chief was quick to leave after that. He claimed he had further meetings to make after the events that just wrapped up. Izuku assumed he just wanted to get out of the same room as him. Manuel speaks briefly to Ida, and Izuku wished he was able to pay attention to it, but instead he had a small interrogation of his own waiting.
Where did you even spirit away to after I told you to stay put?
He tossed his hands up for emphasis.
How in the world did you manage to get hurt enough to be hospitalized and yet not be brought here by any hero who was marked as in range of the Nobu?
Aizawa-sensei just happened to cross paths with me. I was looking for Ida. He was tired, and the lies were clunky as a result.
You just happened to cause paths with a hero who wasn't even located in Osu.
Gran raised a brow, clearly not believing. Yeah, I was worried about Ida and searching. I used my healing as I went to keep civilians alive, so I had a lot of injuries. Aizawa-sensei was looking for Midoriya because we asked him to. Todoroki broke into the interrogation before it got too far. Gran looked at him. Ida approached his cot as well, now that Manuel had apparently left.
I have the call on my outgoing calls to show it, sir.
Ida started to pull out his phone. Gran waved him off.
I don't need you all piling on in his defense. I was just trying to figure out where he has been. Like the chief said, we get in trouble too for neglecting to follow protocol, even if it is our student who break it.
I don't see how my classmates showing you evidence supporting what I said is piling on. Izuku rubbed his eyes. He just wanted this to be over.
Get some sleep. We can talk later when you aren't trying to get a few winks while talking.
They all were quiet as Gran left the room. The door slid shut and cut the tension in the air. Ida put his phone away.
You didn't have to back up my lying, he murmured and sat back against his cushions. You didn't lie, though, Todoroki said.
You did leave wherever you were to find me, and you did happen to cross paths with Sensei wherever you went.
Ida adjusted his one sling for his inner shoulder. No, Aizawa-sensei knew where I was.
He pulled on his shirt hem. The others gave him questioning looks, but Aizawa took the moment to finally enter the room. He had been standing down the hall for a while now, probably talking to the police chief. He huffed in general annoyance as he slid the door shut. I wasn't allowed in while the chief talked to you all. I assume it was about the stain capture they are currently attributing to Todoroki's father. Aizawa had his hands in his pockets as he looked over the three of them.
Are there cameras in here, sir?
Izuku needed to know how much of this conversation could safely happen. Aizawa shifted his weight to one leg and scratched the back of his head. He was acting as relaxed as he did when they were at home. Izuku didn't know if it was for his own comfort, or just how Aizawa acted off any kind of clock. No, there aren't cameras in the rooms, but there are cameras both outside the building and in the halls. They don't have mics on them, though, due to the sensitive and confidential information that gets discussed in some of the rooms, he explained.
Okay.
Izuku took a breath.
I think I shift sooner on nights I'm supposed to, if I am taking more injuries than usual.
His fingers dug into his shirt. His heart raced at the open honesty in front of his friends. They already knew. He was aware of that logically, as did Aizawa, but it didn't make the panic go away. The extended silence that followed, all parties involved not sure how to continue, had Izuku pulling the blanket he had over himself more.
They saw me change, so I just... They know now, so... I, never told Gran Torino, and obviously the other heroes don't know, so that's...
Midoriya, you don't have to explain yourself. I just didn't know how you wanted to handle this. I was trying to let you say what you wanted without rushing you.
Aizawa cut off his rambled backtracking.
The other heroes don't know about me.
Izuku settled on. This apparently didn't sit well with Todoroki, who visibly riled. Like hell they don't know! Or are we going to pretend Endeavor didn't directly attack you tonight? Todoroki stood up from his cot. Aizawa watched him as Izuku looked away.
There's already been media coverage of me, like that. I want to say the first big one was with the slime villain since All Might was there. That's not the point, though. I'm trying to,
He scrunched the blanket up a bit as his frustration mixed with his exhaustion and the definite dissociation lingering over him made it rather difficult to articulate what he wanted.
Slow down, Midoriya.
Aizawa had his tone frustratingly even. It shouldn't even be frustrating to Izuku, but it was. The others seemed unsure how to approach Izuku when he was being so uncharacteristically bristly. He had worked hard on his submissive air, after all.
I just don't have the energy to explain this right now. I'm tired.
Do you want me to pull you from your internship early? There isn't any penalty for it, especially after the battle you went through last night.
Wouldn't that cause more questions?
Ida asked.
I'm his own teacher. It's within my grounds to request a student return to campus even without full disclosure of my reasons.
Aizawa explained.
I'm gonna stay. It's not like I'm gonna leave this room with enough time for us to do anything else before returning home.
Izuku held up his arms. The short sleeves of his shirt showed the bandages easily. The scarf enveloped the bottom half of Aizawa's face easily as he let out a big sigh.
All right. Anything you want to say before I head down to the lobby for the night?
He asked.
You're staying here?
Ida seemed unsure how to take the information, but went ignored.
Aizawa-sensei knows, obviously, and some of the staff at UA knows, like Recovery Girl and Principal Nezu. So now you two know, but please don't tell anyone else about this. It's something that the heroes who do know are trying to work out how to best handle in terms of, the public. Sorry for dragging you two into it.
He smoothed the blanket pack out as he trailed off. It's barely a heartbeat before his friends agreed to do so. Aizawa rubbed his eyes before pulling on his phone.
All right, well, I'm heading back down like I said. You three need a rest. Good night.
The door closed, and the three of them were actually quiet for a bit, long enough that Izuku actually was about to recline the cot back into a bed. Of course, though, the conversations weren't finished.
So, you two also noticed how the police chief was actively bristling his fur the whole time he was here, correct?
Ida asked as he stared at the ceiling.
And how he didn't look at Midoriya-kun once?
Ida ran a hand down his face and heard how Todoroki let out a huff at the motion. Glad someone finds this funny. It's me. I don't know what it is, but that cat cop from USJ also had, physical things about him going off. His eyes kept dilating like cats do when focusing on something, but he clearly wasn't trying to. The mention of USJ just caused all humor to drain out of Todoroki, though. His hands gripped his blankets firmly.
Huh. I wonder why.
Ida whispered. I hurt you at USJ. Todoroki's voice was tense. Ida sat up at that, and Izuku rolled towards him slightly with a confused look. And? You didn't know, so it's not your fault. It makes sense with how you showed up to see both the Nomu and also me. Especially since I was different from normal. More so than tonight. Todoroki was evidently not happy with that response.
Is that why you were in Recovery Girl's office for so long?
Ida asked. His blunt wording visibly added a thin layer of panic to Todoroki's face. No! I was having problems changing back to me. He lifted his arms a bit and let them drop back. On top of having a lot of damage from the Nomu attacking me, I know I had a broken jaw and a few broken limbs and ribs. I think it also tried to crush my skull. It was foggy for a bit there in the actual fight, but to put it simply, I had a lot of broken bits. That doesn't change the fact that I had directly and intentionally injured you, Midoriya. Todoroki looked upset that it was being dismissed so easily by him. Did you? Just because I didn't know it was you doesn't change that fact. If you had known it was me, would you have attacked me? No, not immediately. Not if you weren't attacking first. Todoroki was defensive. He didn't need to be. Izuku smiled. It was wholeheartedly genuine, soft enough that Todoroki stopped talking, and Ida closed his mouth before he even made a noise. It's okay then, he said. Both of them seemed somewhat bothered by how unbothered Izuku was about the idea of having a history involving being attacked by his friend. Todoroki looked away and at where his own hands gripped his blanket. Ida was contemplative in his own silence. Todoroki looked back up and met Izuku's smile with an incredibly direct and sincere expression. I'm sorry, Midoriya, Izuku.
Oh, that's what that tone is.
The regret was blatant in his eyes, but hidden in his voice. It was the same tone he had in the alley. Izuku wasn't sure how to respond. It's really okay, Todoroki. I accept the apology, though. He did his best to sound as sincere as Todoroki was. People have always been scared of me when I look like that. I didn't expect to get out of USJ unscathed. Even Sui was terrified. I think she had actually screamed when I shifted because it was not very pretty that time. Izuku rolled back onto his back. He didn't want to directly face the intensity Todoroki was showing all that long. It made him feel squeamish.
Wait, so Yu-chan said she didn't see you at all after we got out of the building, even during the following days when people were talking in the group chat.
Ida flipped his free hand back and forth. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the principal had a hand in that one. She has been unfairly kind in all of this. And the police don't know about you? Todoroki asked. No, at least not in a way that connects to me and what they think is a runaway villain they can't seem to track. Ida made an unhappy noise.
We really should sleep. Our bodies need rest to heal properly and swiftly.
Ida shut down the conversation from continuing farther. They each settled in the best they could. Izuku wasn't sure how exactly he was going to fall asleep with all the dull and varied aches and pains in the building with him. It added up to a lot of mental noise from his quirk, compulsively dissecting each one and cataloging them. It kept him from picking at his hands more. When Ida's dull and medicated aches faded further into unconsciousness, he looked to the side to find Todoroki staring at the ceiling. I really don't blame you for any of it, Todoroki. I hope you believe that, he whispered. Todoroki glanced at him out of the corner of his eye before returning to his watch on the ceiling dials. I do. I still hurt you, though. You helped me even though I had insulted and attacked you a few weeks beforehand. Izuku laughed softly. Okay, but that wasn't as bad as Snipe shooting me twice. Todoroki twisted and sat up to face Izuku incredulously. Izuku wasn't sure if the muffling of the medications he could tell Todoroki was on had a hand in his expressiveness, or if Todoroki was actually just relaxing around him enough to be as such. "Did you not see the scars when the nurses had me stripped down?" "I was trying to be respectful by not looking." "Oh, well," Izuku ran a hand over the scars. "It's not the first time I've dealt with bullet wounds. The other scars are mostly faded by now, but it is the first time I was shot directly." Todoroki just stared wordlessly. Izuku shrugged to try and wave it off. "Has he even said anything to you since?" "No, I don't really see him for anything to happen." Izuku watched how Todoroki sucked in a frustrated breath and settled back into his cot. "Why, no, how do you just let this stuff happen to you?" Izuku shrugged again and looked at the ceiling too. "I had someone with insider information tell me that I just have abysmal luck." "I'm sorry." "I know. Again, it's not your fault though." Izuku smiled as he matched Todoroki's barely there whisper. Todoroki yawned without sound. "Don't use your quirk in here, Midoriya." Izuku huffed in amusement. "Stay warm then, Todoroki." He waited until Todoroki was asleep before grabbing his phone and opening his messages. He had a few messages waiting already, but he didn't have the emotional energy to smooth over the anxieties of others right now. It may be a cruel choice to have made, but for his own well-being he couldn't. Midoriya Izuku. "You can head back home. I should be fine with Ida and Todoroki here." Aizawa-sensei.
Kid, I thought I said to get some rest.
Midoriya Izuku. "Yeah, I know. The others are asleep, but I wanted to let you know you could head back if you wanted to." Aizawa-sensei.
Is this one of your "I'm not fine but I'm gonna make that a personal problem" moments? Hard to tell over text with you.
Midoriya Izuku. No, thank you for staying so far and coming to get me in the first place, but I have friends here, so I'll be okay. Thank you, Aizawa-san." Aizawa-sensei.
Okay. I'll head back when they have the trains back up to take a few more patrols then. Unlike someone I know, I can't run multiple kilometers at top speed without breaking a sweat.
Midoriya Izuku. "It's the legs." Paw emoji. Aizawa-sensei rolls his eyes. Izuku smiled at the first actual emoji he'd gotten from his teacher. Yamada had claimed that Aizawa used to use them all the time, which was pointedly neither confirmed nor denied. Izuku had been trying to entice one out of him since the conversation. Aizawa-sensei.
If you need me or anyone else, you know how to contact us. It isn't no bother now, and it won't be later.
Midoriya Izuku. "Yes, sir." Izuku walked up the stairs to Gran Torino's home to gather his things, picking at the wristband he didn't feel like taking off. It gave him something to do with his hands. He was going to have to leave almost immediately if he wanted to make his train, which was a relief. He wasn't sure how to approach Gran after his second-to-last interaction was getting chased down by him. Gran welcomed him in amicably and hurried him along in his packing. There was very little there to pack in the first place, but he didn't stall for time. As he was headed out the door, he had to pause as Gran called out to him.
"Hey, Squirrely, make sure you don't run off like that without notifying your team again. That's how people end up dead, and you got something important going there."
Gran gave him a stern look for all of 2 seconds before giving him a small smile and waving him off. He waved back hesitantly as he turned and hurried to the station. I can understand why Yagi-san was intimidated by him. If this is how he is now, I can't imagine how he had been in his prime. The train ride was nice, and Yagi actually met him at the station, looking like a neatly contained, anxious mess. They had been texting while he had been in the hospital. Yagi, a flurry of concerned messages that were suspiciously delayed in their timing. After a bit, he revealed that Aizawa had told everyone to leave off with the messages until the afternoon so Izuku could sleep. Yagi had been at an appointment, followed by meetings with the PR team at his agency. By the time he had gotten out, Aizawa was already with Izuku and had told the rest of the teachers as much. They stopped to get a snack as Yagi walked Izuku to his home. Marble could be hurled roaring loudly from the balcony as Izuku walked up. He laughed as Yagi bumped him playfully and ushered him inside to rest. School was the first thing tomorrow morning, after all. Aizawa wasn't home as he walked in, but he locked the door behind himself and scooped up marble on his way to his room. If he was asleep before or after Aizawa got home was a question he wouldn't be able to answer. All he remembers before waking for breakfast was Marble's purring and kneading paws on his side. As he walked into the classroom at his usual early time, he found more classmates than usual already inside. It was all excited chatter about internships and heroes or sidekicks that were met. The energy never failed to stay high, even when Bakugo walked in and sat in silence, clearly pissed off, but not lashing out with it. Izuku was listening to Tsuyu talk about her internship when Uraraka came in and nearly tackled Tsuyu with her excitement to be back with her friends. He opened his arms, prompting gleeful but muffled noises of excitement as she hugged him too. His heart felt full, even in the glowing post-recovery days he still had. Aizawa had said that morning that he was failing to account for his emotional recovery time when he was pushing himself through shifts. He thought he had been doing fine, personally. When Shinso came in, he looked more tired than usual, but not unhappy about it like he did on bad insomnia nights. He pulled out a pocket-sized sketchbook that Yamada had bought for him and started doodling changes he was wanting to make to his costume already. It was only when the general excitement got focused that Izuku felt the desire to pull away from everyone once more.
Did you see the news segment this morning about Stain's capture?
Sero's usual grin didn't falter as he pulled up the clip on his phone.
Dude, don't worry about the news, but did you see the forum posts? Someone got a clip of when he was caught.
Kirishima whipped his phone out and unlocked it, the video apparently already up.
It almost looks like that villain from USJ. Oh shit, that's the one from the slime villain attack!
Kaminari leaned over Kirishima's shoulders.
Did you see how it saved him when they fell? Imagine having that thing at your beck and call.
Kirishima sounded in awe as he held his phone out far enough for as many classmates to see as possible. Mina looked to be paying only half attention, more focused on measuring Bakugo into talking. The sketching Izuku was doing drifted into repeated coiling circles. Tsuyu was looking at him with concern, but he didn't want the attention. He was afraid someone else would notice how she always looked at him in these conversations. He didn't know how to ask her to stop doing so without sounding rude. The door to the classroom opened, and everyone rushed to their own seats. The bell rang. The day proceeded. Aizawa explained the upcoming midterm exams they would have. The written aspects were very loosely outlined, and the physical was just mentioned as that, a physical exam. They had a week, that it would be spread over, as well standard. It would be intensive throughout said week, with the physical on the last day.
I expect you all to utilize all facilities and methods available to you. The staff lounge will be open for the first few hours after the school day's end to allow requests and observations.
Aizawa held up some papers.
Larger zones will need to have brief forms filled out to ensure they are being used properly, but are also open for use by any of you interested. As is standard with Hero Course trainings, any structural damages will not be charged within any and all allotted training areas.
He set the papers down as he glanced at the clock.
That's all for now.
Is it alright if I sit on the outside of the booth today?
Izuku wasn't sure how defensive anyone would be of their typical seating arrangements, but everyone was happy to accommodate, no questions asked. The discussions at the lunch table kicked off pretty fast for the day. It was still loosely based around the things that happened in Hosu, but was focused on the pre-existing crime rates before and after Stain had gotten there. A drop that had been noted in multiple cities he had been active in prior. Izuku had stood up a few times during the talk, getting more animated than he typically did, and it had the rest of the table eagerly matching his energy.
Localized crime always fluctuates, yes, but you cannot deny the lowered average rates in these cities.
Ida adjusted his glasses as he sat somehow straighter in his seat.
It's a lower average on noticeable crime rates, but that doesn't mean the overall crime rate has dropped.
Izuku set his chopsticks down to use both hands, his gestures for once actually sweeping out of what one would call his personal bubble.
There are plenty of areas run by underground rings more than the actual heroes. The vacuums that Stain left behind were prime territory for such groups to move in and establish new branches.
Studies have shown that hero efficacy has a marked
influential difference compared to hero population density. That has been true through all of the ages, and
Ida started.
you can argue these samples are skewed due to population density overall having an effect on these scales, though.
Mina pointed with a dumpling, other hand covering her mouth as she spoke around her last bite. That and also these presumed secured ranges could also be false fronts put up by the population who were in on the know-how of the area. On top of all of that, secured ranges typically attract more wolves to the flock of residents, and when... Izuku cut off in a choked whine. A lot of things happened in that one moment. Everyone was standing except him. Most of them said some variant of an offended, "Hey!" as they did so. Shinzo's entire energy went from calming neutral to intensely sour as he was roughly gripping the elbow that had smacked the back of Izuku's head. Some of the food on the table actually got knocked from trays with how quickly everyone had gotten up. Izuku, on the other hand, was cradling the back of his head in shock. It hadn't even hurt all that much. Baton Pass practically erased brief shocks like that the moment they happened. It was the mere fact that it had happened at all that had him so thrown. He had thought UA was different. It had been different. So far, it had been. The blonde-haired kid looked briefly thrown off track by the reaction before he sneered at them all. Did those big heads of yours turn you all into a gang too? All acting like a pack of feral dogs? Try me, Shinzo growled out. The kid opened his mouth and his gaze wiped blank. The majority of the table sat down again after that, still glowering at the kid. Ida, though, immediately started to hound Shinzo to stop. This would only get Shinzo in trouble to use his quirk on students outside of exercises. Shinzo shoved the teen away by the elbow he had gripped, dropping his quirk in the same motion. This is the kind of person they let into 1A? My. The kid started again, but Izuku cut him off. He stood up to his full height, something he didn't do often, and glared up at the stranger's eyes. What the hell is wrong with you? The others at Izuku's table stayed quiet. If he turned around, he would have seen how all except those who knew looked surprised. You normally go around and assault other students without reason? The blonde had the nerve to pull up his lip in an affronted look, as if Izuku was the one stepping out of line here. He didn't even answer Izuku. Instead, he glanced at the friends behind Izuku. I heard some of you were involved with the whole stain incident. The look turned haughty. Was USJ not a big enough headline for you? Had to get the next front page as soon as you could. Ida started to speak, but Izuku stepped closer, angling his head some as he spoke over Ida. It was one thing when it was him, but... was it just one thing? Oh, I'm sorry. Do you not have enough trauma for your liking? I'm sure I can find some places for you to get your fill. He looked over the student, scathing, and continued, I can even take you there after classes are done for the day. Izuku plastered on the fakest smile he could as he went back to standing straight, arms deceivingly limp at his sides. He was beyond tense. Midoriya! A massive hand cuts between the kid and the rest of them. Izuku glanced to the side and saw a girl with orange hair. He was suddenly sick of being around people. I'm so sorry about Monoma. She shoved the blonde Monoma apparently further from the table as he protested loudly. Izuku's face dropped into a frustrated glare. You're just gonna apologize for him? Like your words mean anything. She started to try and stir up a more friendly conversation, but Izuku just turned and walked away. Bickering immediately broke out behind him, but he didn't stop, even as he heard the scrape of chairs on tile. He didn't want to be around anyone at all. The day had just been downhill ever since the video of Stain was brought up. He slipped into the crowd of the cafeteria before anyone caught up to him and left the room entirely. He had thought that after how well everything had been going at UA compared to Orudera, he was finally free of being randomly assaulted just for existing. Bakugo aside, he had left them all behind. Literally, no other students from that school had made it into UA at all. He kept walking quickly through the halls. He could hear his own harsh breaths, not fast, just rough. That feeling of bubbling anger he was getting slowly accustomed to was surfacing once more. That aching and acidic and painful and weepy and all things sour mantra of, it's not fair. It wasn't fair. He was crying now as he walked faster, head down, and glared at the floor beneath his feet. His hands grasped at nothing, stuck in a limbo of reaching for his own hair or his shirt hem. He found himself hiding in the shrubs immediately in front of the main building. The space was just big enough for him to tuck between the concrete foundation and the shaped foliage. He wanted to scream. The tears felt too hot on his face. He wanted to throw a complete fit and shred whatever he could get his hands on. The shrubs, grass, dirt, papers, his clothes, his skin. His phone buzzed and he wanted to throw it away from himself. He couldn't, though. He was supposed to be good. He had to be good. He had to show he was worth it. He had been doing so good for years. He had been helping people at any point he could. Was he really good, though, if at the moment he started to have just a few nice things, he started to become this horrid and angry? He didn't even earn the things he had at current, and he still was shucking the fact that he had to be good so quickly. He hardly deserved it. These feelings and thoughts were ugly. He didn't know how to handle their viciousness. Aizawa had said he had been grieving last time, but he couldn't figure out what he was grieving now. Was grieving always this ugly? He didn't know. His phone buzzed. He didn't know, and he was getting so tired of being so afraid and so lost and so alone. He cried until the bell rang for the end of lunch. He kept crying, curled over himself as the bell for the next class rang. He gave himself only a few breaths more after that second one, though. He was supposed to do good. He had to. I'm sorry, Oka-san. He was supposed to behave and be good. He stood up and dusted himself off. The halls were empty as he wiped his face off. He didn't bother going toward the classroom, though. The degree of tardiness would have him sent to the teacher's lounge to talk to Aizawa anyway. Izuku didn't even get to the proper hallway before he saw said teacher striding around the corner with intent. Aizawa's furrowed brow smoothed out immediately as he pulled up short. He sighed softly and approached Izuku, who stayed where he was standing. A hand came up, stalling briefly when Izuku tensed ever so slightly and pulled something out of his hair. A small twig with a leaf still attached.
What happened, Midoriya?
He asked, calm as ever. Lunch was bad. I wanted to be alone. He dodged.
Did you not hear the bells?
I wasn't ready. I'm sorry, sir. The look he got said Aizawa knew there was more to it than that.
Don't apologize. Next time, ask for what you need. You had a stressful weekend already.
Aizawa walked past Izuku, leading the way to the classroom. When the door opened, Izuku saw the immediate relief on the faces of his friends. Although, other than from Todoroki and Ida, there was also a tinge of nervousness in the looks. All Might stood at the front of the class with a rather well-disguised relief as well.
Apologies, All Might. I had pulled Midoriya from the halls for discussion about some of his form submissions, but it ran longer than expected.
He bold-faced lied.
Izuku did his best not to react. Not a problem at all, Eraser.
As Izuku took his seat, he almost immediately felt the press of Shinso's foot against the back of his chair. He turned a bit to see the questioning look. He didn't want to talk about it, though. So he just smiled weakly. If his friends stood closer to him than usual during hero training, no one commented on it. If they lingered longer after the school day ended, no one commented on it. If he didn't say anything as he walked home with Aizawa, he didn't comment on it. When he pulled his things out of his bag to start his homework, he found his bento wrapped up neatly inside, chopsticks tucked carefully into the tie. He pulled it out gently as his eyes started to water again. There were notes with comments all over it.